The metallic screech of twisting aluminum cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Marcus Williams watched in disbelief as Officer Bradley raised the heavy baton above his head and brought it down again on the left wheel of his custom wheelchair. The crowd of shoppers outside Riverside Grocery stood frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion as sparks flew from the damaged spokes. "Stop. Please. That's my chair." Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. His hands pressed against the cold concrete where the officers had dumped him moments earlier. His legs, paralyzed from the waist down since the construction accident 3 years ago, lay awkwardly beneath him. The dignity he'd fought so hard to maintain was dissolving with each violent blow to his mobility. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus had been navigating the produce aisle with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to adapt. His morning routine was sacred. Coffee at 6, exercises until 7:30, then the short journey to Riverside Grocery, where Mrs. Chen always saved him the ripest tomatoes. At 34, he'd built a new life around these small certainties after the accident had shattered his old one. The wheelchair hummed quietly as he maneuvered between displays of autumn squash and apple pyramids. He'd saved for 2 years to afford this model, a sleek titanium frame with responsive controls that gave him back some measure of independence. The morning sun streamed through the store's large windows, casting geometric patterns on the polished floor as he reached for a bag of spinach. "Excuse me." The voice behind him carried the sharp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus turned to see a woman in her 50s, blonde hair pulled back severely, designer purse clutched like a weapon. Her eyes narrowed as they fixed on his chair. "That's a very expensive wheelchair you have there." "Thank you," Marcus replied politely, though something in her tone made his stomach tighten. He'd encountered enough pity and curiosity to recognize when someone was looking at him differently, but this felt more aggressive. Karen Mitchell had noticed the wheelchair the moment she entered the store. In her world of homeowners association meetings and property value discussions, she'd developed a keen eye for things that didn't belong. The chair looked too sophisticated, too new for someone who was obviously receiving government assistance. She'd seen him here before, always buying organic vegetables and name-brand items. It didn't add up. "Where did you get it?" she pressed, stepping closer. Other shoppers began to glance over, sensing tension in the air. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm sorry, but that's really not your business." He began to turn away, but she moved to block his path. "I think it is my business when I see stolen property." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several customers stopped their shopping entirely, creating a loose circle around them. "Those chairs cost $30,000. There's no way you could afford that." The assumption hit Marcus like a physical blow. In 3 short sentences, she'd reduced his life to a stereotype, dismissed his education, his former career as an architect, his insurance settlement, everything that made him who he was beyond his disability. "Ma'am, I can assure you this chair is mine. I have all the documentation." "Documentation can be forged." She pulled out her phone with theatrical precision. "I'm calling the police." Mrs. Chen emerged from behind the deli counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd watched Marcus transform from the broken man who first wheeled into her store to someone who'd found reasons to smile again. "Please, there is no problem here. Marcus is good customer." "Stay out of this," Karen snapped, already dialing. 911, yes. I'm at Riverside Grocery on Maple Street. I need to report a theft. There's a man here with a stolen wheelchair, and he's refusing to cooperate." Marcus's hands trembled on his controls. The familiar sensation of helplessness washed over him. The same feeling he'd experienced in the hospital when doctors explained that his legs would never work again. But this was different. This was chosen cruelty. "Ma'am, the wheelchair is not stolen," he said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "I can show you my insurance papers, the receipt from the medical supply company." "He's getting aggressive now," Karen continued into the phone, her voice rising dramatically. "Send officers immediately. I don't feel safe." The first patrol car arrived within 6 minutes, followed quickly by a second. Officers Rodriguez and Bradley entered with hands resting on their utility belts, their eyes scanning the scene with professional wariness. Karen rushed toward them immediately, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "Thank God you're here," she breathed, pointing accusingly at Marcus. "That man stole that wheelchair. He's been acting suspicious. And when I confronted him about it, he became hostile and threatening." Officer Rodriguez looked between Karen and Marcus, noting the obvious disparity between a well-dressed woman and a man in jeans and a worn sweater. "Sir, we need to see some identification and proof of ownership for that chair." "Of course," Marcus replied, relief flooding his voice. He reached for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and a laminated copy of his insurance claim. "Everything's here. The chair was custom built after my accident. My insurance covered it through settlement funds." Officer Bradley barely glanced at the documents before handing them back. "These could be fake. Ma'am, you said you witnessed him steal this." Karen's confidence soared. "Absolutely. I saw him take it from the medical center parking lot yesterday. He thought no one was watching. But I got the license plate." She rattled off a series of numbers that bore no resemblance to Marcus's actual plate. The lie was so brazen, so casually delivered, that Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. "That's not even close to my plate number," he protested, fumbling for his registration. "Officer, please, just check the VIN number on the chair against my paperwork." "Sir, I need you to exit the wheelchair immediately," Officer Bradley commanded, his tone hardening. I can't walk," Marcus said quietly. "I'm paralyzed. This chair is how I get around." "Don't give me that sob story," Bradley snapped. "We've seen fake disabilities before. Out of the chair, now." The crowd of shoppers pressed closer, phones appearing as the situation escalated beyond anyone's expectations. "Mrs. Chen stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched Marcus's humiliation unfold. "Please," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Just call the medical center. Call my doctor. Call anyone who can verify." "We're not calling anyone until you get out of that stolen property," Rodriguez interrupted. Without warning, he grabbed Marcus under the arms and hauled him from the chair. Marcus's legs dragged uselessly as they deposited him roughly on the concrete floor of the store. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the suddenly silent space. Children stared wide-eyed from behind their mothers' skirts. Elderly customers leaned heavily on their carts, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. "This is evidence," Bradley announced, gripping the wheelchair's armrests. "We'll need to impound it for investigation." "You can't take my chair," Marcus gasped from the floor, trying to prop himself up on his elbows. "Without it, I can't get home. I can't get anywhere." "Should have thought of that before you decided to steal," Bradley replied coldly. He began pushing the chair toward the exit, but Karen stepped forward with a suggestion that would haunt the community for months. "You should destroy it," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the store. "If it's stolen property, it should be dismantled, so it can't be used to commit more crimes." The officers exchanged glances. Standard procedure would have been to impound the chair intact, But something about the woman's certainty and Marcus's perceived defiance had triggered their worst instincts. "Ma'am, step back," Rodriguez warned the gathering crowd as Bradley produced his expandable baton. "Police business." The first strike hit the left armrest, cracking the custom padding that had been molded specifically for Marcus's body. The second blow targeted the delicate electronics that controlled the chair's movement. Sparks flew as circuits shattered and wires separated. "No!" Marcus's scream cut through the air like a siren. He tried to crawl toward his destroyed mobility, his fingernails scraping against the concrete as he dragged his useless legs behind him. "You're destroying my independence. That chair is my legs." The baton came down again and again. The titanium frame, designed to withstand years of daily use, began to buckle under the assault. The crowd watched in stunned silence as two police officers systematically demolished the device that allowed Marcus to participate in society. 17-year-old David Park had his phone recording from the moment the officers arrived. His hands shook as he captured the destruction, knowing instinctively that he was documenting something that would matter far beyond this moment. The video would later go viral, sparking national conversations about disability rights and police accountability. Mrs. Chen could no longer contain herself. "Stop!" she cried, rushing toward the officers. "You are hurting innocent man. This is wrong." "Ma'am, back away, or you'll be arrested for interfering," Rodriguez warned, but his voice lacked conviction. Something about the scene was beginning to trouble him, though his pride prevented him from stopping his partner's destruction. Karen watched the demolition with satisfaction. Her arms crossed over her chest. In her mind, she'd prevented a crime and protected her community. The fact that a disabled man was now stranded on the floor of a grocery store seemed like an acceptable consequence for his apparent deception. The wheelchair's destruction took less than 3 minutes, but for Marcus, it felt like a lifetime. When the officers finally stopped, his mobility aid was nothing more than twisted metal and shattered plastic scattered across the store's entrance. The quiet hum of its motor had been replaced by an ominous silence. "We'll be in touch about charges," Bradley announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Someone will need to come pick you up, sir. You can't stay here." Marcus looked at the ruins of his independence and felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with metal or machinery. He'd survived the construction accident, the months of physical therapy, the psychological trauma of rebuilding his identity. But this deliberate destruction of his dignity felt insurmountable. As the officers prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen approached her store manager, Tom Harrison, who had been frozen with shock during the entire incident. "Check the security cameras," she whispered urgently. "Check them now." Tom's hands trembled as he accessed the store's digital surveillance system on his tablet. He scrolled back through weeks of footage, searching for any evidence that might support or refute Karen's claims. What he found instead would change everything. The security files showed Marcus entering the store every Tuesday and Friday for the past 8 months. Always in the same wheelchair, always following the same routine. More importantly, the system had automatically logged the wheelchair's registration number each time it passed through the entrance sensors, a security feature designed to prevent theft of motorized shopping carts. "Officers," Tom called out as Rodriguez and Bradley reached the door. "You need to see this immediately." The tablet screen displayed a clear record of the wheelchair's ownership, registered to Marcus Williams at his home address. The serial number, insurance documentation, and purchase history were all verified through the medical center's database, accessible through the store's security partnership with local healthcare providers. Officer Rodriguez stared at the screen, his face paling as the implications sank in. They had just destroyed a $30,000 medical device belonging to a disabled man, based on the false testimony of a stranger. Jesus Christ, Bradley muttered, looking back at the wreckage they'd created, and Marcus still lying helplessly on the concrete floor. Karen's confidence evaporated like morning mist. "That's impossible," she stammered. "I saw him steal it. I saw him—" "Ma'am," Rodriguez said slowly, his voice heavy with realization, "you've made a very serious false accusation. This wheelchair belongs to Mr. Williams, and we've just destroyed his personal property based on your statement." The crowd's murmur grew louder as words spread through the store about what the security system had revealed. Phone cameras that had been recording the destruction now turned toward Karen, capturing her shocked expression as her lie unraveled in real time. David Park, still filming, stepped forward. "I got everything on video," he announced loudly. "The whole thing. Her accusations. You guys destroying his wheelchair. All of it." Mrs. Chen knelt beside Marcus, offering him a bottle of water and a jacket to cushion his position on the hard floor. "Help is coming," she promised softly. "Real help." Tom Harrison was already on the phone with his corporate headquarters, explaining the situation and requesting immediate legal counsel. As a business owner, he understood the gravity of what had occurred on his property and the liability implications for everyone involved. Within minutes, David's video was uploaded to social media with hashtags about police brutality and disability discrimination. The footage showed the stark contrast between Karen's confident accusations and Marcus's quiet pleas for verification, followed by the senseless destruction of his mobility aid. Local disability rights advocate Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, saw the video within an hour of its posting. As someone who used a wheelchair herself due to spina bifida, she understood exactly what Marcus was experiencing. She immediately began organizing a response. "This is beyond unacceptable," she posted in the disability community's social media groups. "A man's independence was literally destroyed based on prejudice and false accusations. We need to act." By evening, the video had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from around the country, expressing outrage at the treatment Marcus had endured. Disability rights organizations began coordinating their response, while legal experts offered pro bono services. The next morning, Riverside Grocery opened to find nearly 300 protesters gathered in the parking lot. They came in wheelchairs, on crutches, with service dogs, and with signs demanding justice for Marcus and accountability for Karen and the responding officers. Sarah Chen had worked through the night to organize the demonstration. She'd contacted local news stations, reached out to civil rights lawyers, and coordinated with other advocacy groups to ensure maximum impact. "We're not just here for Marcus," she announced through a portable microphone as cameras rolled. "We're here for every disabled person who has been viewed with suspicion, who has been treated as less than human, who has been denied dignity because of prejudice and ignorance." The protest was peaceful, but powerful. Participants shared their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment, creating a tapestry of experiences that resonated far beyond the disability community. Local residents who had never considered these issues found themselves confronting uncomfortable truths about accessibility and acceptance. Marcus, who had spent the night at his sister's house after being unable to return to his own apartment without his wheelchair, arrived at the demonstration in a borrowed manual chair. The crowd parted respectfully as he approached the microphones. "I never wanted to be the center of attention," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "I just wanted to buy groceries and live my life with whatever independence I could manage. But what happened yesterday wasn't just about me. It was about how we treat people who are different, people who are vulnerable. His words were interrupted by applause, but he continued with quiet determination. I don't want revenge. I want change. I want accountability. I want to ensure that no one else has to watch their independence get destroyed because someone made assumptions about their worth. The protest attracted national media attention, with major news networks picking up the story and examining the broader issues of disability discrimination and police accountability. Legal experts appeared on talk shows to discuss the civil rights violations involved in the case. Within a week, Karen Mitchell found herself facing multiple lawsuits. Marcus's legal team, led by disability rights attorney Jennifer Walsh, filed charges of defamation, filing a false police report, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The city faced additional liability for the officer's destruction of personal property without due process. The police department launched an internal investigation that quickly revealed a pattern of problematic behavior from both officers. Body camera footage from previous incidents showed Rodriguez and Bradley had a history of aggressive responses to vulnerable populations, though nothing as extreme as the wheelchair destruction. Officer Rodriguez, despite his initial participation, began cooperating with investigators once he understood the full scope of the situation. He provided testimony about Bradley's leadership in the destruction and Karen's insistent demands for aggressive action. Officer Bradley, however, remained defiant throughout the investigation, insisting that he had followed proper procedure and that Marcus's injury was irrelevant to the theft investigation. His attitude during depositions further damaged both his case and the department's defense. Karen's life began unraveling as the video continued circulating online. Her employer, a real estate company that valued community relationships, placed her on administrative leave pending their own investigation. Her homeowners association, faced with negative publicity, asked for her resignation from the board. Most devastatingly, her adult children, who learned about the incident through social media, like everyone else, struggled to reconcile the woman in the video with the mother they thought they knew. Family relationships strained under the weight of public scrutiny and private shame. The medical device company that manufactured Marcus's wheelchair offered to replace it free of charge as soon as the legal proceedings allowed. They also implemented new security features that would make false theft claims easier to disprove in the future. Riverside Grocery, seeking to repair its reputation and demonstrate community commitment, established a fund for disability accessibility improvements throughout the shopping district. They also implemented mandatory sensitivity training for all employees and created an advisory board including local disability advocates. 6 months later, the legal resolutions began falling into place like dominoes. Karen was found liable for defamation and false reporting, ordered to pay substantial damages to Marcus, and sentenced to community service with disability advocacy organizations. The judge hoped the service would provide education that had clearly been lacking in her previous life experiences. Officer Bradley was terminated from the police force and faced criminal charges for destruction of property and violation of civil rights. His pension was suspended pending resolution of the criminal case, effectively ending his 20-year law enforcement career. Officer Rodriguez received a suspension and mandatory retraining, but kept his job after demonstrating genuine remorse and cooperation with the investigation. He became an advocate within the department for better disability, awareness training, and de-escalation techniques. The city settled Marcus's lawsuit for an amount that covered not only replacement of his wheelchair, but also upgrades to accessibility infrastructure throughout the municipal area. New sidewalk ramps, accessible parking spaces, and public building modifications began appearing across the community. Marcus received his replacement wheelchair on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the original incident. The new chair incorporated advanced technology that provided even greater independence than his previous model. But more importantly, he had found his voice as an advocate. He began speaking at schools, police academies, and community organizations about disability awareness and the importance of treating all people with dignity. His calm, thoughtful approach to education proved more effective than anger or confrontation in changing minds and policies. The grocery store incident had transformed him from someone trying to blend in with society to someone determined to make society more inclusive. He established a nonprofit organization focused on disability, rights education, and accessibility advocacy. Mrs. Chen, who had witnessed the entire tragedy unfold in her store, became one of Marcus's strongest supporters. She organized community fundraisers for his nonprofit and ensured that Riverside Grocery remained a welcoming space for customers with disabilities. On the first anniversary of the incident, the community held a celebration rather than a memorial. The event showcased the positive changes that had emerged from the tragedy: new accessibility features, improved police training, stronger disability rights protections, and a community that had learned to look beyond assumptions and stereotypes. Marcus wheeled through the same grocery store aisles where his independence had been shattered. But now, he moved with confidence and purpose. The produce section where Karen had first confronted him had been redesigned with wider aisles and lower shelves, making shopping easier for everyone. As he reached for the same bag of spinach he'd been selecting that fateful morning, Mrs. Chen appeared beside him with a warm smile. "How are the tomatoes today?" she asked, knowing it was his traditional question. "Perfect," he replied, understanding that she was asking about much more than produce. "Everything's perfect." The conversation between them had become a weekly ritual, a small affirmation that dignity and kindness had prevailed over prejudice and cruelty. Other customers nodded respectfully as they passed, some stopping to chat with Marcus about his advocacy work or accessibility improvements they'd noticed around town. David Park, now a freshman in college studying journalism, still sent Marcus updates about the impact their viral video had on disability rights discussions nationwide. The footage had become a teaching tool in law schools, police academies, and diversity training programs across the country. Karen Mitchell had completed her court-ordered community service and issued a public apology. Though she had largely disappeared from public life, some community members whispered about seeing her at disability advocacy events, listening quietly in the back row, though she never approached Marcus directly. The officers' body cameras from that day had been incorporated into training materials that taught de-escalation techniques and the importance of verification before taking action. The destroyed wheelchair served as a powerful reminder of how quickly prejudice could turn into irreversible harm. But perhaps the most important change was harder to quantify. The community had examined its own biases and assumptions, leading to uncomfortable but necessary conversations about inclusivity and acceptance. Schools implemented new curricula about disability awareness. Businesses invested in accessibility improvements beyond legal requirements. Marcus wheeled toward the checkout counter, his weekly shopping complete. The same automatic doors that had witnessed his humiliation now opened to reveal a world that had changed in fundamental ways. The concrete where he had been abandoned was now marked with a memorial plaque donated by the city, reading simply, "Dignity for All." As he loaded his groceries into his car, using the hand controls that allowed him to drive independently, Marcus reflected on the journey from victim to advocate. The destruction of his wheelchair had been intended to strip away his agency, but instead, it had revealed strength he didn't know he possessed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, where protesters had once gathered demanding justice. Now, children played nearby while their parents shopped, growing up in a community that had learned to value differences rather than fear them. Marcus started his car and began the drive home, passing the community center where his nonprofit would host its weekly meeting that evening. New members joined regularly, drawn by his example of turning trauma into positive change. In his rearview mirror, Riverside Grocery grew smaller, but its significance in his life remained enormous. It was the place where his world had been shattered, then rebuilt stronger than before, where a community had seen its worst impulses play out, then committed to being better. The wheelchair that had been destroyed in hatred had been replaced by something more valuable, a commitment to justice, understanding, and the radical idea that every person deserved to navigate the world with dignity intact. In the end, what had been broken could not just be repaired, but transformed into something more beautiful and resilient than what had come before.